All right, today we're diving into a really fascinating high-stakes crisis simulation called Red Code 6. Now, it was designed to find a company's breaking point, but what it ended up revealing was something huge, that the most dangerous weak spots have almost nothing to do with firewalls or software and absolutely everything to do with people. So, that really gets us to the heart of it, doesn't it? What's the actual weakest link when everything hits the fan? You might immediately think it's a piece of tech, right? An unpatched server, some clever malware. But well, Red Code 6 was built specifically to prove that assumption wrong.
And to really get what this whole test was about, you've got to see how totally different it is from your typical fire drill. Fire drill is simple. It's predictable. You're just checking if people can follow a procedure. Red Code 6, it's the complete opposite. It was a messy, chaotic business simulation that was built to put the entire organization under stress. Why? Because the real focus wasn't on the tools. It was on people and the decisions they make when the pressure is on.
Okay, so let's get into our first section. To properly test this team, the creators couldn't just, throw a simple problem at them. No, they had to build a complete, totally realistic corporate battlefield where every single choice had a real-world consequence. So, the setting for this whole thing was a fictional company they called Big Money Vilnius, but everything about it was designed to feel incredibly real. We're talking about a big international fintech firm moving huge amounts of money every day and trying to navigate this tangled web of super strict EU regulations. And the people in the simulation? They weren't just watching. They were hired into real leadership roles, which meant they were the ones in the hot seat when it all went sideways. And here is the real kicker. They only had 2 hours. That's it. 120 minutes to figure out what was happening, get it under control, and make massive strategic decisions. That time crunch, it was a pressure cooker, and it was absolutely intentional. So how did this whole disaster kick off? Well, that brings us to section 2, the first mistake. Because every crisis has a starting point, and in this simulation, it wasn't some sophisticated, noisy attack. It was something way, way more common, and a lot quieter.
Okay, so the clock starts, and right at minute 0 it happens. A C-level executive, probably busy, trying to hire someone, opens up a document that looks like a totally normal resume. And with that one single click, the attackers are in. The break-in wasn't through some fancy backdoor in the code. It was through a routine, everyday business activity. And this, right here, is such a critical point. The attackers didn't have to break down a firewall. They just exploited a human process. It's brilliant, really, because it shows how companies pour millions into their technical defenses, while the biggest risk is just walking right in the front door disguised as business as usual.
And look, this wasn't just any kind of breach. According to all the industry standards, like the ones from NIST, the US government's tech standards body, when a high-level account like this gets compromised, alarm bells should be screaming. It's supposed to be the highest possible priority. But in that early chaos, the team completely missed how serious this first signal was. So with the attackers now inside, the simulation kicks into its next gear. Welcome to Section 3, Chaos and Confusion. At this point, the attacker's goal isn't just to steal stuff. It's to unleash what you could call an architecture of distraction, designed to completely overload the team and pull their attention in a dozen different directions.
First, the tech team gets an alert. Boom! A sudden spike in anonymous traffic. Is this the real attack? Is it just a diversion? They have no idea, but now a chunk of their brain power is focused right here. Then, at pretty much the same time, the communications team gets hit. Rumors are suddenly flying on social media that Big Money Vilnius has been hacked. So now you've got a public relations fire to put out, which yanks focus away from the technical problem.
And just to really crank up the heat, the legal and compliance folks get the one call they never want. It's the regulator, and they're on the line asking questions that nobody has answers to yet. So the crisis is now exploding on the technical front, the public front, and the regulatory front all at once.
All this chaos brings to mind this great quote from an organizational theorist named Carl Weick. He said that in a crisis, the hardest part isn't solving the problem, it's creating meaning. It's just trying to understand what is actually going on. They call it sense-making. The team wasn't just fighting malware anymore. They were fighting a tidal wave of conflicting information, trying desperately to piece together a clear picture.
And all of this leads us right to the climax of the internal meltdown. Section 4, the decision bottleneck. This is that moment where the entire response just grinds to a halt, all because of a fatal flaw in how the company was structured.
I mean, just look at this timeline. The attack kicks off at minute 0. An hour and 15 minutes later, things are spinning out of control.
But then, at the 1 hour and 45-minute mark, with only 15 minutes left on the clock, these massive, time-critical decisions like shutting down payments or isolating the network are still waiting. Why? Because everybody was waiting for one single person to give the okay.
This just perfectly exposes the core problem here, responsibility concentration. It's a flaw in the org chart, really, where way too much authority sits with way too few people. On a normal Tuesday, it might even seem efficient, but in a crisis, that person becomes a single point of failure and the entire organization just seizes up.
And you know, as the management expert Henry Mintzberg points out, this is such a classic trap. The team probably felt like they were being careful, right? Being professional by waiting for the final say-so. But in a crisis that's moving this fast, delay isn't caution, it's a choice. And it's one of the most dangerous choices you can possibly make.
And that brings us to our final section. And really, the core lesson of this entire thing, the real failure. The biggest takeaway from Red Code 6 is that the malware, the traffic spikes, the rumors, all of that was just noise. It was a catalyst. This was never really a technology test. It was a test of organizational maturity. The team got completely stuck in this false dilemma. They were thinking, okay, do we protect security or do we protect our reputation? They saw them as two conflicting goals, and that's what made them hold off on telling the public anything, because they hoped they could fix the tech stuff first. But here's the truth. The biggest damage to your reputation doesn't come from the incident itself. It comes from the perception that you're hiding something.
This table just lays it all out perfectly. On the left, you see the symptoms, the stuff you could see happening. Delayed decisions, total confusion. But on the right, you see the real disease, the deeper problems that caused it all. That responsibility concentration we talked about, the fragmented sense-making, communication silos, and just a basic lack of readiness for the regulators. These are problems with structure and culture, not with code.
So if you boil this whole thing down, the ultimate lesson is this. An organization's true resilience doesn't come from having the best software or the strongest firewalls. It comes from having a decision-making architecture that can actually handle chaos, that distributes authority, and that empowers people to act when it matters most.
And that leaves us with one last question to chew on. Forget the checklists and the standard fire drills for a second. If a real, messy, chaotic, multi-front crisis hit your organization tomorrow, is it truly ready for its Red Code 6?